The chief ended up working for the sergeant in Cuba while the sergeant tried to get the shootout at the steakhouse swept under the carpet. The problem with the Cuban operation was that Kateri was supposed to be keeping an eye on Fidel Castro, but Castro kept trying to make it with her. Gator and the chief were there to keep an eye on her. At that point, Castro's militia was armed with machetes. He needed some better weapons, and he was trying to get them from Gator and the chief. The chief had a passport and Florida driver's license saying his name was Joseph Edward Duffy, and Sergeant Duffy had introduced the chief to Castro as his son. The sergeant knew Castro would be getting higher-tech weapons from the Soviet Union, so he arranged for Gator and the chief to smuggle a few hundred guns in from Florida. The sergeant had a 50-foot cabin cruiser named Kateri that they used to smuggle the guns into Cuban water. Gator and the chief pretended to be tourists who liked to fish, and the locals got used to seeing them in the boat. They anchored the boat in a bay on the north side of the island where Castro's men were able to get it unloaded before the Batistas knew it was there. As the weeks went on, Castro managed to raise enough money to buy more arms. When he came up short on cash, he traded alcohol and tobacco for the weapons. Gator and the chief smuggled the alcohol and tobacco into Florida and sold it cheap to the Seminoles. Before long, Castro's militia was armed with 38s and 22s instead of machetes. Later, they were able to bring in some rifles. By that time, the Fidelistas had already taken over many of the highlands with handguns and machetes. Nobody ever found out that Castro had been forcing himself on Kateri while Gator and the chief were away. Castro knew Kateri liked the chief, but he wanted her to marry him. Kateri thought giving it up to him was part of her job, and she decided it was best to stay quiet about it. More than anything, she wanted to be with Joe. She suspected that he wanted to be with her, but he was showing respect because they were supposed to be like brother and sister. Gator, the chief, and Kateri stayed in Cuba as the revolution progressed and helped Castro coordinate his attacks. The chief played a big part in planning the attacks. They started out in the mountains where most of the people supported Castro. Those who did not fled to lower ground or were executed. Before long, Castro had control of all the highlands and was ready to work his way down to the cities. Joe and Kateri had started sleeping together, and Castro was jealous. He wanted Kateri, so he sent a hit squad after the chief. By then, Kateri was 4 months pregnant, but she hadn't told anyone. She figured the baby was Joe's, and she was waiting for the right time to tell him. One night, she and Joe were in bed together in her shack. She was lying on his chest with his arms wrapped around her when she asked, "Do you like children?" "Yeah, I suppose they're all right. How about you?" "I love kids, especially babies," she replied, looking up at him and smiling. Kateri's dark face was glowing, and she looked excessively happy. Joe picked up on it and asked, "You ain't ready to tell me something, are you?" She sat up. "Well, since you—" The door flew open, bounced off the wall, and swung back. Several men were standing outside, armed with handguns. The chief's gun belt was hanging on the bedpost. Reflexively, he pushed Kateri off the right side of the bed, yelling, "Stay down!" He pulled his Colt from its holster with his left hand as he stood. The men had their guns drawn on the chief, but didn't seem prepared to use them. The leader was a man named Rico, whom Joe recognized. With a heavy Cuban accent, Rico shouted, "Drop the gun, Duffy." The chief pointed his .45 at Rico's head and replied, "I was going to tell you to do the same." "Come on, Duffy, there's 5 of us. Don't be unreasonable." "What do you want?" "I want you to come with us," Rico said. "For what?" Joe pulled his pants on with one hand. "Fidel wants to talk to you." "He knows where to find me. If he wants to talk to me, he can come talk." Rico took a step closer with his revolver extended and shouted, "I'm not here to play games with you, Duffy. Now you're coming with us." The chief felt uncomfortable with his peacemaker in his left hand. He lacked the confidence to take on Rico and his men left-handed. He asked, "Can I put my hat on?" "Make it quick and don't try anything." The chief kept his .45 pointed at Rico as he reached toward his hat, which was hanging on the bedpost on top of the gun belt. However, instead of grabbing his hat, he grabbed his tomahawk with his right hand and threw it toward Rico. The tomahawk stuck in Rico's shoulder as Rico's gun fired. The chief rolled over the top of the bed, switching the Colt into his right hand. He landed on his knees, gun pointed at the men. Rico dropped to his knees, yelling, "Hijo de puta!" He pulled the tomahawk from his shoulder. "Mátalo!" Rico's men opened fire. Joe fanned the hammer of the single-action Colt, holding in the trigger, and watched the other 4 men drop. "We gotta get out of here," he yelled, pulling Kateri to her feet. "Let's go." Joe kicked the gun out of Rico's hand and grabbed his tomahawk. "You're lucky to be alive," he shouted to Rico as they ran out the door. "If you ever try anything like this again, you'll wind up like your friends." Joe and Kateri jumped into their Jeep and sped down to the cantina where Gator was drinking. They pulled him away from the bar, made it back to the boat in record time, quickly boarded her, and headed back to Florida.